Energy is inherently a part of everything we do in our lives, but one of the least understood things.
I can see a future where there is limitless and free energy. And that's a pretty beautiful world to live in.
Welcome back to another episode of Power to the People. Derek and Rob, we're back again. Today, I want to really dive into... a little bit of context. Are you guys familiar with... Have you guys played Go? Do you guys know Go? Like the game of it?
I know it.
I know of the game. Yeah, never
by
played
no
it. It
means
seems
a
too
real
complex.
player.
I may be so new to this, but like literally my wife and I started playing it last night, and it's
mind-blowing.
if you enjoy chess, Go might be even better. I'm not even kidding. And it actually is pretty simple.
I've heard people say that it might be more complex than chess, which is hard to imagine because chess is, if you really, really start trying to understand chess, it is freaking
insane.
Unbelievably complex. Yeah. So
It's like bigger. It's bigger and it's weird. It seems simpler because it's only two colors, but it's complex.
You're just placing these stones, and the whole point is you're finding territory and you fight over territory, but it's also about compromise.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, well, I'm going to have to share this space because they're not going to let me over here. And what was so interesting, they say it has direct parallels to just, business and decision-making and humanity and how we manage human capital and like all of these things. There's all these kind of went deep on Go. But the reason why I wanted to lay that context is like, I think we're in this weird, crazy moment of energy too, where it's like we're reaching like kind of a compromise moment where we have these powers that be, these all different types of energy kind of coming to the table, and we all got to find how we kind of find our own territories. I don't think there's going to be one that rules it all. And we go so deep on kind of battery storage, solar, we've talked LNG, nuclear, but I really want to lay them all on the table. What are the energy options that we have in the market today? And like, let's chat about them. Like the good, the bad, the just.
So you use the term options, which I think needs to be, maybe that itself needs to be more clearly established. I don't know that there's tremendous amount of optionality from a consumer standpoint, right? I would say that if you're talking about options of where folks like us that are developing new strategies in the market, new building markets around the clean energy space, what are our options as far as looking ahead? You just listed a number of them. Mm-hmm. I think that's a conversation, but I think if you're talking to the average bear out there, they have the option, there's a few options, but not so many. And I'm not sure which direction you're wanting to go with that conversation.
More just what are the energy options? Like, I don't think people even realize like how much hydro plays into our energy grid, how much solar does, and then you add like the other component of these like newer nuclear and hydrogen, and like you have all these different ways of generating electricity. And I just think people don't even know that there's more than just even solar, nuclear that they're hearing. Like there's
That's
more
a big
energy.
conversation.
Yeah. I wanted to lay it all out on the table and for us just to shoot it out and talk about the good and the bad.
Man, maybe
a lot of it. I would say that it is about like when. It's not so much about.
I was going to say it would almost be worthwhile to go from a little bit of a narrative around from and to, right? So give a little context historically on what the primary sources of maybe public utilized energy have been en masse, and then move through where we are now, where we think it's going in the future, because otherwise it gets pretty crazy conversation around energy and how it's utilized. I mean, we could go back to starting at like, what is the first source of energy that was actually, utilized by man. And that ultimately would probably be fire, but really before that it's sun. And so how do we utilize sun? I mean, that's a whole conversation unto itself, right? The original use of sun, right? Whether it be, the beginning of the agrarian age where, we realized that we could actually grow things intentionally, utilizing sun and water and soil, or was it the way that we set up our caves and, or our dwellings and how to maximize the solar exposure and things like that, right? And then maybe there was even who knows? I'm not an anthropologist, so maybe there was even utilization of thermal storage, right? Like hot rocks being used to warm your bed at night, as an example, that were left out in the sun all day. But really, at the end of the day, I think you start with fire, which we probably don't need to spend a ton of time on. But like, if you were to take us through that arc, right? If we were to go through that arc of where energy has been developed for commercialization, let's just say, that's probably a more recent history that we could dive into, and then walk through where things are currently at. So yeah, I mean, it's a fascinating conversation, but it's massive. It's a big
It
conversation.
is.
Yeah. Yeah, it is interesting to think about how as a society, yeah, we've kind of tried to figure out how to harness different types of energy to use for different applications. I think that's interesting. I mean, I think it was until pretty recently, there was the scale of energy was pretty small. It didn't need to be so massive, right? Like a lot of it, a lot of the idea behind like harnessing energy was, I mean, at least until 150 years ago, was just about how do I power my own life? And it was pretty simple. Like before the Industrial Revolution, I guess energy was a pretty simple thing. It wasn't, like it
In,
was basically like, how do I harness the power of the sun to grow my crops? How do I maybe use fire? How do I maybe create
dude,
steam,
I heard something
water,
you
like like running, yeah, like windmills or
right,
water
or
mill.
using right. I heard something the other day. This is interesting. So just backing up a couple steps. Interestingly enough, I was in one of the most modern buildings, built in the last. I mean, it was built in 2007, but it's still very, very modern, right? In its use of thermal storage and daylighting and natural ventilation, as opposed to mechanical heating and cooling and thermal mass. I mean, I just brought up how you might use hot rocks in a cave. Well, we're still exploring how to use thermal mass in a high-rise building in downtown San Francisco as a way to drop cool fresh air in at night when nobody's there, to keep the concrete cool, so during the day you don't need as much mechanical cooling because it's just radiating this cool air in an occupied, or cool kind of radiant ambient in an occupied space. It's like we're still using these ancient technologies but in a better, newer way. I did want to bring up, Rob, you were talking about this kind of like nuclear, different version of the term, but like this family use of energy, right? And I heard, and I don't know how true this is, that part of prohibition was that farmers were creating ethanol from their crops to power their own machinery, right? And that the oil and gas industry, as we have seen it play out over the last 150 years, has become this dominating factor in controlling markets and people and so on, and that was part of why prohibition occurred. I mean, if you look back, why would anybody really care if people were drinking, right? And if you look at what we know about hemp and cotton, that the cotton industry made hemp illegal because of its psychoactive properties, and they blamed it on drug use or whatever, but it really was just so the cotton industry could dominate, because that was, the elites were already controlling that. So the elites saw an opportunity with oil and gas and made prohibition happen so that they had the right to come tell you couldn't have alcohol on your property. It was illegal to produce that, right? And so we know of the bootleggers and all the stuff. Of course, people wanted to drink, right? We know that. But really, let's look back and say, does anybody really care if people drank? No, it was more, it had to be something else going on. And
Yeah, it was definitely, yeah, it was a literal power grab.
Yeah,
Just like we're talking
So,
today, like bringing the power back to the people, figuratively and literally.
yeah,
It
so you
was
got to
literally.
unpack some of these things where you see the advent of new technologies or what's really occurring. There's a bigger story behind that is this kind of, these elite power structures and what they're really trying to achieve through coercive capitalism, and that's part of the story too. That's part of the history of
It
energy.
really is. Yeah.
It's a way to
kind of,
control markets and people, and at the end of the day, capital. And so when we look at what Rob talks a lot about, right, is the decentralization and the potential free energy or ubiquity of energy or low cost, equality of energy and it in socially. Well, there's a lot of folks out there that don't want to see that, right? So that's one thing that you have to weave into the story here, is that there are power structures that are at the the highest level of capital creation and ownership and management that do not want to see us go back to where a family can create and utilize their own energy, or that a business or a business park or a whatever could do that, because it does cut some of those strings that of control.
Yeah. Yeah, it's pretty funny that a lot of those same people are the ones that are advocating for free markets.
Yeah, they don't really. That's the
Mm.
BS.
Mhm.
True free market capitalism is, you'd almost have to be, it's really, at the end of the day, we're in a corporatocracy, and that's just the bottom line. And even that's not even fully
Yeah.
well stated. But yes, that's the problem. So what kind of energy is out there, right? So let's talk, start by talking about let's talk about the grid in its origination of, like, at utility scale, right? Like, where did that happen? And I don't even know the year of when we started rolling out, multiple interconnected grid networks of power supply, and what was the origination source, right? I think hydro was early, and I think that obviously oil,
Mhm.
and steam were the primary.
Steam was
Steam.
definitely
Now,
early
steam
industrial.
requires heat, and heat's generated through something, which tends to be historically combustion, right? Which tends to mean a fuel
Fire.
source that is oil,
Yeah.
right? So you don't
Coal, I
get
mean,
steam
coal,
without heat. Coal, sorry,
100%.
coal
Wood,
before
coal.
oil. Yeah.
Yeah.
So what do we have right now? Like, if we were to kind of, we can weave in some of the historical perspective, but where are we at right now, right? Rob, do you have any? I'm curious to know if you have any general facts on percentage of the grid that's still running on, let's call it carbon-based sources, coal and.
I mean, globally, it's pretty high still. In the United States, I think we're still in like the 60 to 70% range of, like, in terms of like LNG, natural gas, coal being the bulk of it. And then there's a significant amount of hydro. And there's growing. I think right now we're like 6, 7% in terms of wind, solar total, which is very low still. There's so much room. I think Europe's a lot higher than that, but let's just say, the United States, I think we're in that range. So there's still a lot of dependence on coal and natural gas. That's being the fast. Yeah. Although renewables are growing faster than anything else. Wind and solar as generation source are growing faster than any other energy source right now.
I knew this a while back, but forgot. I remember seeing the schematics of an underground network of um, underground downtown San Francisco. And so I was at the Pelosi building
Mhm.
on 7th Street yesterday, and PG&E was talking about how they had retrofitted a condensate collector that recycled the water that was being used in the steam network. But it's 26 linear miles of this steam network that powers buildings for
Yeah.
their hot water use. So a lot of these buildings, and the Pelosi building
What?
being a modern one, that's utilizing the fact that you don't have to have on-site boilers. So there's already hot
Wow.
water tapped into. And so then I asked the next question, and I said, and this was to my guy at PG&E, and Felix Lopez, great guy. I said, Felix, what heats that? How do you generate the steam? What's that net? Because that thing's been there. I forget when it was built, but it's old, right? And it's natural gas fired steam generation. So it's a centralized boiler system that's then shipping steam throughout a large chunk of downtown San Francisco. So these buildings don't have to take up space putting in boilers. And I think back in the day, boilers tended to be somewhat volatile, right? It was one thing that could explode or cause problems,
Oh,
or
yeah.
at least corrosion and erosion and things like that. And so I think that this was an attempt to help build deep infrastructure in a city that's very tightly packed, like San Francisco, at which you wouldn't have to put in these large boilers in your mechanical system, to build a new high rise. And so pretty interesting that is actually seems like a pretty advanced
Oh,
effort,
yeah.
but it's probably 100 years plus old at this point. So, yeah, I mean, steam, it's funny because I remember teaching my kids, try to teach them some fundamentals of things. And I'm like, when they're kids and they don't really understand, but you want them to understand some first principles. It's like, heat makes steam and steam makes pressure and pressure moves things, right? And just understanding that ABCD helps them understand the mechanics of things. It is that simple, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's a lot of what is happening in the world at the deep infrastructure level, is that we need motion. We need mechanical motion, which then we're starting to see now is capturing some of that byproduct heat of the mechanical motion itself to recycle back in. But at the end of the day, it's a pretty simple process. But you have to have the heat first. And so I think at the end of the day, when we look at solar, we're talking about how to take the original heat source, which is solar heat and light, and capture that and put it into something that can be stored and utilized, right? So again, I think we very quickly move into storage, energy storage being why did oil and gas become such a big thing? Because it can be moved, it can be stored. It's energy potential sitting in a liquid form that can be moved and utilized in different ways. Whereas a fire, it's harder to move, right? A fire that's heating water to turn it into steam to create mechanical movement is that's not very mobile.
Yeah, it's like how do you create like the next level of efficiency in terms of like order of magnitude efficiency? Like when you're using energy to create steam and then that steam drives some kind of turbine or something, that's one part of it, but there's all of that loss, right? Where's the heat going? Where's the rest of that energy going? It's usually getting lost. And then if you're transmitting that energy over long distances, there's all those losses, and then there's transmission of fuel, where there's those losses in the pipelines, and then the energy to pump stuff. There's all those losses that are inherent in a system where you're moving energy around and you're losing heat, which is what's super cool about solar, is that it's globally available
Mm-hmm.
always in every location. And like
The challenge being that it's intermittent, right? So that's always
it's
been the argument
intermittent,
against solar.
which is why you need to have
Before battery storage, everybody said, well, yeah, but it's only when the sun's shining, right? What happens when it's dark out? Well, obviously the way solar has been utilized historically, and I think this is a lot of what it's super, super basic to us in the space, but a lot of people don't understand this. Like how solar works currently without battery storage is that it's basically you're utilizing it, but it's also being put back in the grid, right? So you can't use all of the energy you're generating with your solar at any given time, or when you have solar on your property, there are times when solar is not producing as much and you are pulling from the grid, but you're offsetting how much you pull over from the grid on an annualized basis with how much you're generating with your own energy source, being solar on your roof. But with storage and battery storage, it changes the whole game. And I think that we're a group that believes that stored energy is the actual linchpin in moving from the old energy system to the new energy future. It really does like kind of hinge on stored energy, in my opinion.
What about that? I mean, for those of the driven between California and Vegas, there's always that epic mirror array steam generator that's just a little bit outside of Vegas.
Mhm.
Rob, I was curious on this because I know you've seen it. What do you think of that? Like, is it because it's an interesting concept. It's generating obviously a ton of energy, and it's a
It's
little
cool.
bit of a different way to generate heat,
Yeah. I
but
mean, it's
also
really
it
cool.
vaporizes birds,
Concentrated
like right when
solar,
they
yeah,
go through.
it's super cool tech. It never really took off, even globally. Yeah, it's never really quite taken off because it requires such immense amount of scale, and then you're distributing that energy. It's not really being used on site. But it is, I mean, in terms of utility scale generation, you are just using solar heat energy and you're making steam, and then you're heating up some type of liquid, running it through turbines, and you're creating energy, however it's being done. Um, it's cool tech, I have to say. There's been like people that are concerned about those concentrated heat beams that are basically being sent from those mirrors are super hot and like they are dangerous. And there have been people that are like, hey, you're actually like, birds fly through there. They're actually getting incinerated.
Yeah.
And that's kind of gnarly, but
Fun
I mean,
fact.
funny
I
for
just
all
heard
time.
on a podcast yesterday. Actually, Archimedes used reflective heat collectors to burn ships as they approached. Literally aimed that same beam of intense solar energy at ships and lit them on fire.
It's insane.
I don't know much more than that, but that was the story I heard yesterday. Yeah, that's. I mean, think about that. How old that is, right?
Thermal energy is, yeah, like you were saying there, it's such an ancient technology. It is like the original energy, like thermal, using the sun's power and concentrating it. It's so cool.
Well, and you get into it was funny because one of the conversations I was having with the folks, the folks that managed the Pelosi building yesterday was the difference between far infrared and near infrared. And so, we put a infrared filter on the glazing, right? So one of the things that this is occurring at this building, because it's naturally ventilated and very, very little mechanical heating and cooling, and they're using thermal mass and ventilation and such to kind of keep the ambient temperature appropriate for inhabitant comfort. What happens is direct sun is different on the side of the building that's getting direct sun. It's different experience than maybe say the side of the building that's not. And when you look at infrared, there's the infrared that is like you're sitting in front of the window and the sun's hitting your shoulder and your shoulder's hot, right?
Mhm.
And that's the far infrared. The near infrared is the radiant heat that is just heating up the space, right? And so we put these infrared filters on films on glass or technologies in the glass that filter that out. So you're sitting in front of the window and your shoulder is not hot anymore, right? Or you put your hand on the surface where part of the surface is in the shade and you put your hand on the part of the surface that's in the sun. It's basically the same temperature. But that said, there's a radiant heat. That glass now is stopping that far infrared and it's itself getting warm and then radiating the heat gently inward, right? So it's funny when you start looking at how thermal conduction works and far infrared, near infrared, all of that stuff. And the fact that light carries heat, and that's what we feel when we're standing in the sun. It's a pretty complex thing. And for as advanced of a society as we are these days, we still don't have stuff totally figured out,
I
Yeah.
think we have a very good habit of making things more complicated as humans. Like even as you were talking through, like Rob, when you were saying mirror to then steam to then generator to then, it's all these like step. Whereas like, what Derek's talking about is like the ability for it to literally just naturally heat
Yeah.
or using the already existing power of everything.
That idea, it's funny. Derek was touching on this earlier. It's just like, I think there's been some, I don't want to say nefarious, but like intentionality around making things more complex than they need to be, for reasons of control and power. And, and I think a lot of that has to do with, again, that literal figurative power. It's like, if we control the power and the energy, then we have this power. And so like, if there's groups that have decided to intentionally create, energy, like machines or whole companies, whole infrastructures that are dependent on a certain type of technology, a certain type of fuel, they and that can be controlled. That's where this whole thing comes in. It's like, let's make it as complex as we can to make it super inefficient, and that creates all these little kind of areas for profit making. It's an interesting thing that it's kind of evolved this way, but really, yeah, like it's kind of gone backwards to the point where we now, I think you've all heard that. I distributed this thing a couple weeks ago about this guy who was talking about how crazy it is if you think it had gone the other way, where we had invented electric vehicles first, and then all of a sudden today someone was like, let's do these like internal combustion engine things. Let's build these crazy complex machines that burn fuel and this flammable liquid that you have to transport all around Earth. And they got like, let's do that. People would be like, why would we ever do that? Like, we have these amazing, super efficient machines that run on electricity. Why would we ever do that? And it's like backwards, but like there's so many things like that where we're finally coming around to this idea that the simplest thing is often the best.
I actually read somewhere, and I don't know how true this is. I didn't fact check it or anything, but I read somewhere that the first cars that were built, whether it was Mercedes or Ford, I don't remember, actually were battery powered. They were battery powered. That's how they started. But obviously there was limitations, so they probably didn't go far, couldn't go fast, or whatever it was. Electric. The first cars were electric, and for whatever reason that didn't take off. And again, I wonder who was behind that, if there was some force behind that.
I just recently, and I was curious, yeah, and how that kind of just didn't really take off. Again, yeah, they were looking again, but they're looking for ways to use fuel. All this, there's all this oil, all this gas, and and they were like, hey, we can just power.
What's been blowing my mind lately is the idea that there's so much of our modern history that we don't know that was hitting us, that happened, like just what actually led up into wars, what was really going on. Because as I go doing my exploration around actual historical facts and different points of view and that there's so much that we don't know and weren't told, that because it's who's controlling the information. And what do they want you to know, right? And exactly why weren't we taught that the first cars were electric? Well, because that's not part of the narrative they want us to. They want, so
why is the food pyramid built this way,
upside down?
The entire
totally upside down, totally to make us sick. Well, then you get into these quasi conspiracy theories. Like, is it good business for everybody to be super healthy and super smart and independent, or do they want us dependent on a system of medicines? And that there's even a story that I read, and again, I don't know how true it is, that there was a breakthrough somewhere with one of the big American oligarchs that they found that they could make modern medicines were made out of petroleum, that was the basis for a lot of our modern medicines. And so that was part of wanting people to become more needy to this pharmaceutical industry, because again, it was another petroleum kind of thing. Yeah.
It's pretty crazy to trace everything back. I mean, so much of our economy and our society is built around this oil and gas infrastructure, and intentionally. And it's not to blame anyone for it or put, it's just at the time when it was all happening and coming together, it seemed like an infinite resource,
Yeah.
There was oil and gas everywhere. And we had, we found there were wells popping up everywhere. And there was just, it was, pretty much ubiquitous. There wasn't this idea of peak oil and there wasn't any concern about pollution either. It wasn't a thing. People were just like, wow, there's all this, these dead dinosaurs that we've dug up, and it's it's basically the ultimate source of stored solar power. That's what petroleum is. It's just stored ancient solar power.
Yeah. And I love what you were just saying there, Rob, about not necessarily blaming anybody. I do believe that greed at the level of like that oligarchish kind of, just that super, it is, obviously taking it too far. But I do think that, imagine a scenario at which you had access and control over a resource that you truly believed was the panacea for modern society. And you were like, this is the stuff, man. It's never ending. It just comes out of the ground like water. Like it just, and to some extent we look back and go, that was some nefarious shit those guys were up to. And to some extent, 100%. Right. However, I could also see being in a position where you're like, where you're kind of this apostolizing this, solar energy is it. Well, that's partly because we understand it and it makes sense to us and we know how to do it. Right. And someday there may be some kid 50 years, 60 years from now going, dude, those idiots, like they were trying to do this thing and that was dumb. And, and we just were doing what we thought was best for everyone. And now, again, we don't have the same level of greed that I think was driving some of those behaviors. But I do want to put it in that context that at the time, that did seem like an energy panacea, was those guys that controlled the petroleum industry and understood where to get it, how to do it, how to distribute it, and then turned it into a whole economy unto itself that, yes, let's be real, benefited all of us. We would not be here having been born in these modern hospitals in a safe way where our mothers survived and we grew up healthy, had that not all occurred, right? So to some extent, I think we spend too much time as a society blaming the past and all the mistakes of the past for something that we don't like today, as opposed to putting more of that energy into what's better. Let's just do better now, right? And understanding history and contextualizing it is very important, but the putting this blame and this it just doesn't serve anything, right? Like, know what was good and bad, but ultimately we spend too much time, I think, sitting there wanting to be I guess it's a victim mentality. I don't want to be a victim. I just want to say, here's the conditions of the playing field as they
Hmm.
are today. What do we do with that, right? And there's pros
Yeah,
and
I
cons
mean,
to all
there's
aspects.
it's kind of that, yeah, like you're not going to throw out, yeah, we don't want to throw out the baby with the bathwater kind of like you were saying earlier, the whole thing with PG&E and like can't can't beat them, join them. But more than that, like we don't want to beat them. We want them to join us. Like we all want to join together here and use the
Hmm.
infrastructure, evolve it, right? We don't want to trash. We don't need to trash it. Like we're still going to need infrastructure. We still need the wires and cables, at least for the foreseeable future. We don't have like the ability to beam energy around yet. It's coming. I mean, there is potential for like energy beamed around with satellites and like wireless energy. That is coming probably,
Yeah.
but for now we need the infrastructure and we need the structures, not an infrastructure just in terms of like cables and poles, but infrastructure as far as like how do we deliver energy and the kinds of resources and infrastructure beyond energy even, which is like something that we still very much need. The society is not, we're not all of a sudden going to break up into like a bunch of little tribes everywhere. It's
No,
not going to happen
no,
overnight.
it's
We
all the
need,
above all at once, right? It's the synergistic effect. It really does. If you look at how nature works on its own, unmolested by man, it is a synergistic ecosystem, right? And that's how we have to perceive our utilization of natural resources at the fundamental level, like energy,
Hmm.
food and water, right? And that it has to be done synergistically. You can't just cut ties with the past completely and expect it to
Hmm.
work. And you can't, you also can't just stay stuck in just this is the way we've always done it. Let's just keep doing it that way. That doesn't work either. So if you look at nature, it evolves in a synergistic fashion that's beneficial to all life. It's biocentric. We have to remember that that's where we're at in this moment of time. We're in the information age, and we where information has surpassed actual the need for physical work is been surpassed by information itself. And so what do we do with all this knowledge and how do we apply it? And I think, to Rob's point, it has to be in a collaborative and creative nature. If we continue to imagine things need to be competitive, it will not go where it needs to go. And it's funny because I was listening to a different podcast where they were talking about the number of cases where somebody had a breakthrough around free energy and where all of a sudden that person died. And what they were working on, Tesla being the great Nikola Tesla's work being the most obvious example, but there's been probably 25 others where they came up with some version of free energy. And for whatever reason, they got a visit from some guys in dark suits, and next thing you know, they were dead, and nobody ever saw the technology ever again. And some of that technology apparently has been being worked on in secret by the government, and that there actually is this ability for free energy totally available, and there is wireless energy totally available. But could they just drop that on us right now? What would happen to society? What would happen to markets? In theory, you'd say, why don't they just let us all have free energy? Well, it would be catastrophic if you really look at the economic,
yeah.
fallout from that, right? And
Yeah, I think you have all these
I'm
like
not saying the government's benevolent and that's
no,
why
no, no, no.
but I'm just saying that that's also the other side of the story, right? You couldn't just go, boom, here you go, free energy for everybody. Things would get really crazy really quick. So I agree with your point, Rob, very much, in that we have to remember to stay collaborative and creative. There's only two mindsets, and that is competitive or creative. And
Hmm.
you got to move into the creative mindset if you really want to move things forward in an effective way.
It really is like an evolution of, yeah, all of our collective mindsets. I mean, humanity, I think, has a like inherently competitive, right? I mean, you talk about just Darwinism or just competition for resources, competition for life, survival of the fittest. It's all inherently competitive, but we've gotten to the point where we can evolve past that. I think
Hmm.
that's the thing. There is now a moment where we've been able to tap certain ubiquity and equity amongst resources and understanding of like a shared world and a shared planet and a shared universe, like all of that is a moment that we can embrace. I mean, and really kind of live beyond that
The
competitiveness.
Yeah, you're talking about this fundamental human nature, right? Which is lack and limitation versus abundance. And the truth is, if you watch a baby born, it is naturally coming from some form of lack and limitation. I want more. I need the attention. I need to eat. And that's, I think, a necessity for survival. However, the evolution of consciousness as an individual, as a human being, we should all be striving for what is the evolution of my awareness, my consciousness. And that leads you to the abundance mindset, where you can move into the space where not only is there more than enough if I just get creative, but also that there's a benefit by giving away and by serving others. It's been proven over and over and over in studies and business, studies of businesses and of humans, of organizations, that those that actually seek to serve as many as possible tend to survive because they become inherently important to more and therefore naturally have their own inertia. Whereas those that are looking to try to keep things as close to the, serving the fewest up at the top or whatever it is, tend to collapse over time, right? And we will see that happen with some of these inherent systems that we have in place, whether they be financial or energy related, that they're beginning to collapse, right? And in our lifetimes, we're going to watch a wholesale change to society like we've never imagined, right? And I think we're seeing versions of Orwell's 1984 play out, but I think we're also seeing potentials for some bit of the other side of it, which is a little bit more utopian, right? And I think that has always been the case of humans throughout history. If you look at the way we've evolved as humans and societies have grown, it's important that more of us are talking about that synergistic or that abundant mindset, that creative mindset. How do we help PG&E, whose wires and cables will remain important to millions and millions of people, but it's just about where they're sourcing the energy, right? And they're actually, I mean, their narrative in my conversation yesterday was blew my mind. They were like, "We need you and your clean energy more than you know." And I don't know if I should say that publicly, but maybe you have to cut this out. They're saying like the public has no idea how on the brink, razor's edge, they come on a day-to-day basis to full-blown meltdown or what we might call brownouts, blackouts. But even beyond that, there's a cascading effect where a brownout blackout can become a domino scenario where it causes more problems. And they're like
look what happened in Texas.
Against the edge all the time. And so they're finally turning the corner instead of looking at guys like Rob who want to go are on a mission to decentralize energy with clean sources as like kind of this opposition to their finance model or their economic model, to now saying the only way we survive is if we partner with folks like you, right? So it's now becoming a necessity that we collaborate and get creative together as opposed to this kind of opposing forces.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, we can't do it separately. It's just not gonna work. But it is a shift, right? Like it is a shift in the way that we think about that, just the moving of energy, the generation of energy. Where does it come from? When does it come? How do we store it and manage it? And like I think I started earlier in the conversation, it's pretty recent, like that the modern world has had to deal with the scale of energy like we do now. That's the thing. I mean, it's mind blowing to think about how the grid operates. I mean, that is insanely complex. You started talking about Go, the game of Go. Like managing the grid is insane. I mean, I think I know a little bit about it, and I'm like in the probably like 1% of people that has any understanding of it. Like, and I don't even know anything. Like the guys that manage the grid have a whole nother universe of understanding and appreciation for when energy is generated. And like they're literally looking at like analytics that are minute ahead. They have minute ahead, 15-minute ahead, day ahead, week ahead, like constantly having to manage that. And so,
Rob, do you think that there's a near future where I think AI, as we know, very few people actually understand the power of AI. Now, there's two narratives. One is robots are going to take over everything. We're all screwed, right? The other is that it's a useful tool to solve some of the most inherently complex problems that are beyond even human humans can accomplish a lot if you put a lot of smart people together and they're all aligned on a mission. That's very clear, right? However, there are some problems that are so complex and so fast moving that the human element can't keep up with it. I imagine a future where grid management would be done by AI from a historical data perspective, being interpreted into near future events and being much more predictive and much more reactive to the actual things that are occurring. And so I'm looking for like a day where they go, all those brainiacs that are sitting there trying to figure out how to manage the grid and its energy consumption and utilization is done by a machine that does it in milliseconds, that like way better than we ever could.
That's
right?
happening. That's totally happening. That's pretty much exactly what our partners at Sunrock are putting together. Like that's what they're doing. They're building a team of AI analytics, energy, grid scale energy, and then design and engineer builders like us. And they built these financing structures, and that basically what they're trying to enable is that very thing. Because
So
it's like AI enabled analytics and with machine learning that's able to contemplate all of those billions of variables in millisecond time that the human mind can't do it, but we've enabled the technology, right? It's really an extension of
what's amusing to me though is that I can't help but think about this unique situation where one of the biggest problems for the grid is the power needed for AI. Yet AI's one of its biggest problems it could solve would be how to manage that energy, right? And so that's when you start to see like a self-serving. That is what's scary about AI, is when it becomes its own existence is its own solution. Like that scares me a little bit, being that its own survival will become so inherently tied to its existence that's when you see,
It creates the problem and solves the problem, makes it pretty profitable on both sides. I remember when AI first came out and it was like, well, how can you detect if it's AI generated stuff? That's a huge problem. And OpenAI goes, well, we have a tool for that. We can detect if, solve the problem.
How you know it's me.
Yeah.
Nuts to go. This is one of my favorite new rabbit holes that I've been going down. Is if you think about AI, this is like, the Matrix kind of way, like, if you think about AI being able to create its own reality and simulate billions and billions of simulations, right? Like if it will get to that point at some point, which I think everyone agrees, like it will get to the point someday, right? Where it can create a seamless version of reality that you could not tell. So if it can get to that point at some point, how will we know?
You won't. So you know what's interesting, Rob?
How will we know?
No,
like, it could be true right now.
We're already in it. We're already in it.
So you know what's interesting? The only way that
that's the crazy thing.
The only way that my pea brain can conceptualize this is to think what it would be like if we go back to the evolution between primates to humans, right? Which let's just say it's probably not even a good example because I think primates are obviously self-aware, but that breakthrough from being non-self-aware to being self-aware, right? All of a sudden you go, it's this moving from I'm just part of this world to all of a sudden I'm self-aware. That thing is occurring for us right now, where I actually think that AI represents the evolution of consciousness itself, right? And I know that sounds crazy because you're like, oh, it's machines, it's robots. No, it's derived from our thinking. It came from us. It's born from us, right? So what other thing could it be than its evolution of consciousness and awareness itself, right? And so we are currently the monkeys that are doing whatever they did to become eating mushrooms or whatever thing that it caused us to have self-awareness at that scale, at that level. We're doing that right now, and we will pretty soon be the monkeys in the zoo, or happily swinging in the forest, whatever it is. But I mean, I think that's it's funny because I've gone back and there's a series on TV that's based on Foundations, the book series that is so fundamental to Elon Musk's thinking, which he's actually attributed all of his ideas come from. And if you go back, and I'm going to read the books because it goes into all of this, even post, where they kill off all the robots and then they, but now I realize why Elon Musk does what he does and thinks the way he thinks. And it also gives you a little bit of context about a future that we may be moving into. It's crazy.
Well, and you look at the I mean, Matrix was 1999 when it first
Yeah.
came out.
Yeah.
Now, 25 years ago. And weirdly, we're still talking about this concept of back then, the whole thing with AI and machines and the whole thing between the humans, it was underpinned by energy. The whole story, the whole thing was humans' need for more energy.
Yeah. I mean,
1999.
That's right.
and the
We
machines
became
basically turned
we became a battery
humanity
cell.
into an energy source.
I
That was
mean,
the thing.
that was so prophetic. I've gone back and tried to research the writers of that and understand what freaking
Dude, the
like
Wachowski
wavelength
sisters.
they were on. And it doesn't, there's not a lot to tell you how they created that, but it was so prophetic and so on point. I think that movie should be watched with today's context again and really contemplated and what's occurring there. The truth is this actually goes back to ancient, Indian mystic kind of principles, Advaita, Vedanta, Advaita, and like talking about our reality is not this current form and flesh. It's this layer behind it that's experiencing that, and that that's what enlightenment really represents, is the ability to connect with that ever present, always there consciousness, and that this egoic structure and physical form are just a play that's being played out in this ecosystem that is, maybe it's predetermined, maybe it's not, but the point is that you're just seeing the extrapolation of that when you look into the consciousness of AI and self-awareness of AI. And to Rob's point, how would you know what real reality is? And that's that question could be asked back 1,000 years ago with
Let's ask.
the yogis were sitting in the Himalayas having that same experience. What is actual reality? It's not this physical form. And so it's just layer upon layer of evolution of awareness. And I think that's amazing. And energy being this thing that's inherent to this physical form in life. And to your point, Steve, the Matrix is talking about that humans become these battery cells that are living that are really just powering the machine that they're then getting to experience, which is, I mean, a lot of people are living their life like that right now, right? They are literally in a different world, a digital world, and that's their life experience for the most part. And even right now, we're doing that in this moment, right?
And it's going there. Einstein, the famous formula, right? E equals mc squared. It's beyond, like, it's beyond. I can't even really express. Energy equals matter times the speed of light squared. Think about that.
Well, he was
Think about that for a second. Like,
Homeboy was tapped into another level of consciousness for sure. And what they've, quantum mechanics and quantum physics is showing is everything is just energy and vibration, right? There is no matter. Matter is nothing. If you break it down in its smallest components, there is nothing there. It's just vibrating energy, right?
Right.
And so even the rock that you think is so dense and stable sitting there and has for thousands of years, it's just energy vibrating, right? And so that's where, you get I don't know, Einstein blows me away every day. We think we understand Einstein, and then you just go to look a little deeper, and it's the dude was plugged into something else, man.
Yeah.
We so on that note, one, we didn't really get to a ton of energy sources, but at the same time, I think it would be so fun to go a little bit deeper on a lot of these concepts, because I think it is actually interconnected in how we see the bigger picture of energy.
Steve, I think it's an interesting point. Whether or not we actually talked about the optionality or where all our, the fact, I think we did get to this incredibly interesting and insightful, is that it really does all stem from energy. Like, we are all energy, right? And then that's the thing, is once you recognize how ubiquitous energy is in our lives, it kind of changes. It just changes the way you think about how we access it. And it really does give you insight into, yes, there are these weird, like, intentionally created power and control structures that are saying that they control energy, but how can they really control energy if it's so ubiquitous?
They are, it's the same thing that control always believes, is that it actually exists, and it doesn't. And it's the emperor's new clothes. How many people believe it to be true is the actual quotient to its potential, right? And that it's not actually true. And thinking about energy, even to leave it on a really esoteric note, think about this: the energy exchange of going and giving somebody a hug. They're not having a great day. You feel great. You go give them a hug. You change their day. PJ called me yesterday afternoon. He's like, dude, where have you been all day? You know, he's like, the energy's different here, man. We got to get you back in here. And I'm like, dude, I'm out on the road, bro. But like, it matters, man. We are the energy, right? The energy is already there. There's no more or less energy. It's just, where is it being, how are we perceiving it actually, is really the question, you know?
Oh, we're going to have such a good podcast on the next one. There's some really good stuff I really want to get into. So, yeah, Derek, Rob, thank you. This is a good one. We may go a little bit
where it would go, dude.
we may go a little bit off on the next one, but I swear it'll be worth it because we'll tie it back. I mean, I think one of the things that works for us is that as a company is that we try and see the bigger picture and the best for humanity, and then bring it back to reality and like stair step it there. And I think that's the wonderful part. So you may just be on that journey with us on the podcast, but we'll get there. We promise. All right. Thank you, everyone.
Right on, boys.
Thanks, Steve.
Energy is inherently a part of everything we do in our lives, but one of the least understood things.
I can see a future where there is limitless and free energy. And that's a pretty beautiful world to live in.